My name is Adeline Brooks, and for 29 years I let my family believe I was the disappointment they needed me to be. Easter dinner at my parents' house in Greenwich was never about food, it was about scorekeeping. My mother arranged the table the way other people arrange evidence. The Lennox china that came down from her grandmother, the silver from the wedding registry of 1986, the crystal goblets she only brought out when she wanted the neighbours to drive by slowly. From the curb, the house looked like a magazine spread, boxwood hedges trimmed within an inch of their lives. A flagpole with the brass eagle Dad polished every Saturday, the smell of honey-glazed ham drifting through the screen door like an invitation. But the inside of that house was a courtroom dressed up as a home, and I had been the defendant since I was 11. I drove up that Sunday in a 2009 Subaru Forester with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. I hadn't fixed it because the dent was useful. It was part of the costume. I'd parked that Subaru in front of my brother's BMW so many times my mother had started leaving notes on the windshield. "Sweetie, you should look into a lease. Your father knows a guy." My father always knew a guy. He'd known a guy when my older brother needed a college admissions consultant. He'd known a guy when my younger sister got engaged to a cardiologist whose family had a beach house in Nantucket. He had never, in all my life, known a guy who could help me. When I walked in that afternoon, the den was already half full. My older brother Holden was on the couch with his wife and their 2 boys, both of them in matching seersucker because that was the kind of family Holden had built. My younger sister Bristol was in the kitchen with my mother, peeling deviled eggs and laughing too loudly at something I hadn't heard. Aunt Myrelle, my mother's sister, the one with the salon in Westport and the opinions about everyone's hair, was in the wingback chair sipping a vodka soda at 3 in the afternoon. And my father was where my father always was on holidays, standing at the bar cart with his back to the room, pouring himself something brown and pretending he hadn't seen me come in. "There she is," Holden said. He didn't get up. He never got up. "We were starting to think you got lost. Or, you know, couldn't afford the gas." The laugh that followed was the laugh I'd been hearing my entire adult life. Not cruel, exactly, just rehearsed. The kind of laugh a family develops when one person becomes the running joke and everyone else gets to be in on it. "Traffic on I-95, I said. I set down the grocery store apple pie I'd brought and watched my mother register it with the smallest tightening of her mouth. "Oh," she said, "you shouldn't have. We had Patty bake one this morning." Patty was the woman who cleaned my parents' house twice a week. My mother had taken to calling her by her first name like they were old friends, which I think was supposed to demonstrate something about my mother's character. Bristol came around the kitchen island in her espadrilles and her cream linen dress and gave me a hug that smelled like Chanel No. 5 and resentment. "You look tired, Addie. Are you sleeping? I sleep fine." "It's just your eyes." She tilted her head. "Mum, doesn't she look tired?" "She works too hard at that little thing she does," my mother said, not looking up from the eggs. "That's what happens. That little thing she does, that was what they called my company. For 7 years it had been that little thing she does. I had stopped correcting them around year 3 because correcting them only gave them more material. The longer I let them call it a thing, the more comfortable they got, and the more comfortable they got, the more they told me about themselves without meaning to. Holden didn't know that the cybersecurity firm he managed had run a vulnerability audit 18 months ago through a Delaware LLC that ultimately reported to a holding company I owned. My father didn't know that the wealth management group he'd retired from had been quietly absorbed in a roll-up I'd financed in 2022. My mother didn't know that her favourite gallery in Soho, the one she bragged about to her bridge friends, leased its space from a real estate fund where my name sat at the top of the cap table. They didn't know any of it, and I had spent 7 years making sure they wouldn't. Dinner sat down at 5. My father carved the ham with the same theatrical slowness he'd used my entire childhood, like he was a surgeon and the rest of us were nurses in his operating room. Holden poured the wine. Bristol's husband, the cardiologist, talked about a new electric SUV he was thinking about ordering. Aunt Myrelle talked about a woman at her salon who had cheated on her husband with the husband's brother. I cut my ham into small pieces and didn't say anything, and after about 20 minutes my father turned to me with that look he gets when he's preparing to be generous. "So Adeline," he said, "how's the business? You still doing what is it? The data thing?" "It's going well, Dad. Because Henry's son, you remember Henry from the club? Henry's son started out with one of those tech things and he's at Goldman now. Real money. I could put you in touch." "I'm fine, Dad. Just saying. There's no shame in pivoting." He smiled at me the way you smile at a stray dog you've decided not to feed. "Your mother and I have been worried." "We have," my mother said. "You're almost 30, sweetheart," Aunt Mireille said, "and you're driving that car." Holden laughed into his wine glass. "Don't get her started on the car. Last Thanksgiving, she told me it had character." "It does have character," I said quietly. "It has rust," Holden said. The table laughed. They always laughed. My sister-in-law gave me one of those sad, apologetic looks she's been giving me for 10 years. The look that says, "I'm sorry, but I married into this," and I gave her the small nod that says, "I know. It's fine. It wasn't fine. It had never been fine, but I had stopped expecting it to be a long time ago." What none of them noticed was the phone in my lap, face down on the linen napkin, buzzing every 12 seconds with a different push notification, a securities filing in Singapore, a wire confirmation from a custodian in Zurich, an email from my CFO with the subject line, "Friday morning's call." Friday morning was the morning the Wall Street Journal was running a profile that had been in the works since January. I had been told the embargo would lift at 6 a.m. Eastern, which meant my family had exactly 5 days left of living in the version of reality they preferred. Before I tell you what happened that night, I have to tell you how I got here. Because the dinner is the ending of one story, the beginning is much older than that. I was 11 when I figured out the rules. My older brother brought home a B+ on a calculus exam, and my parents took him to the Capitol Grill. I brought home a state ribbon for a science fair project. I had built a small thing with an Arduino board and a humidity sensor that monitored the soil moisture in our backyard tomato plants, and my mother said, "That's nice, honey. Did you know your brother's been studying for the SAT?" I remember the ribbon. It was blue with gold lettering. I kept it in a drawer for years, and then one day when I was 17, I threw it out, because keeping it felt like waiting for them to notice, and I had decided to stop waiting. The favoritism wasn't an accident, it was a system. My older brother was the heir, the one with my father's name and my father's jawline and my father's instinct for impressing other men. My younger sister was the prize, the pretty one, the one who married well and gave my mother grandchildren on schedule. I was the middle. I was the one who read too much and asked the wrong questions and refused from the age of about 13 to pretend that any of it made sense. I was the one who, when my mother said be a lady, would ask why. And in our family that question, why, was a kind of treason. By the time I was 16, I knew I would leave and not look back, but I didn't know how. I applied to colleges on my own. I wrote the essays in the library because the Wi-Fi at home went out whenever my brother was streaming. I got into a school in Pittsburgh I'd never visited, with a computer science program I'd researched, until my eyes hurt, and when I told my father, he looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Pittsburgh?" That was it. That was the whole conversation. My brother had gotten a parade for getting into Penn. I got Pittsburgh. The deal was simple. My father would pay tuition. That was the limit of what he was willing to do. Room, board, books, food, gas, clothes, anything that made me a human being instead of a transcript. That was on me. I worked 28 hours a week at the campus dining hall, then 32 hours a week as a research assistant in a lab. Then, by my senior year, I was building a small product on the side, a tool that helped lab directors track sample inventory, and I was selling it to 3 universities for $2,000 a year each. $6,000. To me, in 2018, that was the entire ocean. I graduated. I told my parents I was going to keep working on the product full-time. My father said, "That's a hobby, Adeline. You need a job." I told him I had a job. I had built the job. He said, "That's not what I mean, and you know it." My mother got on the line and said, "Your sister's wedding is going to cost us a fortune, and we need you to be reasonable." I told him I was being reasonable. I told them I had 2 more contracts in the pipeline and a meeting with a regional health system. My father said, "Call us when you've come to your senses," and he hung up. I didn't call. For 2 years, I lived in a 1-bedroom in Lawrenceville with a roommate, a graphic designer named Imogen, who paid her share of the rent in irregular bursts and who is, to this day, the closest thing I have to a sister. We had a folding table for a kitchen table. We had a thrift store love seat with a stain on the cushion I had flicked over so the stain was underneath. I worked from a desk I built out of a hollow door and 2 filing cabinets. I worked 16-hour days. I ate a lot of frozen burritos. I drove the Subaru which I had bought in cash from a man in Monroeville for $3,800, and during those 2 years I built the thing that would eventually pay for everything. The product was boring. That's the part nobody understands about how money actually gets made. The product was a piece of compliance software for laboratories that handled regulated samples, the kind of unglamorous back-end tooling that runs in the background of hospitals and biotech firms and pharmaceutical companies, and that nobody thinks about until it breaks. I had built the first version because the lab I worked in as an undergraduate was being driven insane by an audit. I had built the second version because 3 other labs heard about the first version. By the time I was 24, I had 11 customers paying me a combined $400,000 a year, and I was running the whole thing out of a co-working space in East Liberty with 2 contractors I'd never met in person. The first real money came on a Thursday in October. A venture firm in Boston had been emailing me for 3 months. I had been ignoring them, partly because I didn't want investors, and partly because I didn't know how to talk to investors, and partly because some petty corner of myself wanted to do the whole thing without anyone's help. Because that's what my father had told me to do, and I wanted him to choke on his own advice. But by that October, I had hit a wall. I needed engineers I couldn't afford. I needed enterprise salespeople. I couldn't even identify. So I got on a train to Boston, and I sat in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a building in the financial district, and I gave a pitch that I had practiced in my bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. The partner who led the deal was a woman in her late 50s named Carolyn Ostrander. She wore a navy blazer and no jewelry, and she asked questions I hadn't thought of in 7 years of doing this. At the end of 2 hours, she said, "We'd like to offer you $4 million at a $20 million valuation." I remember the carpet. It was grey with a thin maroon stripe. I remember staring at the carpet and thinking, "Don't cry. Do not cry in this conference room." And I said, "I'd like to think about it," in a voice that sounded like somebody else's voice. And she smiled and said, "Of course you would. Take a week." I took a week. I called Imogen. I called my old advisor from Pittsburgh. I called a woman I knew at a competing startup who had taken a similar deal 2 years earlier. I did not call my parents. I did not text my brother. I did not even tell my sister whose wedding was 4 months away and who I was supposed to be a bridesmaid for, even though we had not had a real conversation in 2 years. I took the deal. I took the deal because I was tired and because I was scared and because I had finally accepted that I could not build the next version alone. What happened in the 4 years between that conference room and the Easter dinner is the part of the story that doesn't have any drama in it. We hired engineers, we hired salespeople, we landed a contract with a regional hospital network in Ohio, then a national one in Texas, then a pharmaceutical company headquartered in Basel. We raised again, a Series B at $160 million valuation, then a Series C at $620, then a round that I won't describe in detail because the lawyers got annoyed when I described it casually in an interview last year. We acquired 3 smaller companies. We hired a CFO who had taken 2 other companies public. We opened offices in Austin and London. By the time I was 28, I was the chief executive of a software company that processed compliance data for about 30% of the regulated laboratories in North America, and I owned, after dilution, just over 31% of it. And through all of it, I went home for holidays. You're going to ask why. The comments on these kinds of stories always ask why. Why does the woman keep showing up? Why does she keep letting them talk to her like that? Why doesn't she walk away? I'll tell you what I told my therapist, which is the same thing I told Imogen the first time she asked, which is this: I was not staying for them. I was staying for me. I was staying because I had decided, somewhere around year 3 of the company, that I was not going to let them write the ending of my story. They had written the beginning, they had written most of the middle, and I wanted, very specifically, to be in the room when the ending happened. Because endings only count if the people who told you the story was over there to watch you flip the last page. I also was not, and I want to be honest about this, a saint. There was a part of me that liked the costume. There was a part of me that liked walking into my parents' house in a Target sweater and a Subaru and watching them feel sorry for me, because every condescending pat on the arm and every "honey, are you sleeping enough?" was another deposit in a savings account I was going to cash one day. I told myself it was strategy. Maybe it was also just spite. They're not always different things. So back to that Sunday in April. Easter dinner. The ham. The wine. The cardiologist and the seersucker boys and Aunt Myrail and the rust chokes. My phone buzzing in my lap. After the main course, my mother stood up and walked to the sideboard and brought back a small cardboard box. She set it down in front of Bristol with the kind of ceremony she usually reserved for jewelry. "What's this?" Bristol said. "Your grandmother's," my mother said. "The ring. I've been thinking about it for a long time and I want you to have it. For Hartley." Hartley was Bristol's older son, the 4-year-old, the one with the seersucker. "Mum," Bristol said. She put her hand over her mouth in the practiced way she'd been putting her hand over her mouth since she was a teenager. "Are you sure? It should stay in the family," my mother said. "It should go to someone who will appreciate it." The ring had belonged to my father's mother, my grandmother. The woman who, when I was 9 years old and visiting her in Sarasota, had taken me out to the screened-in porch at sunset and told me that I was the smart one and that smart women had to be careful because smart women scared people. She had given me a copy of Little Women that summer. She had died when I was 15, and I'd cried in my closet for 2 days because she had been the only person in my family who had ever looked at me like I was a whole person. I knew the ring my mother was holding. I had been told when I was 13 that it would come to me. My grandmother had said so. She had told my father in front of me. She had said the ring goes to Adeline. My father had nodded the way he nodded at his own mother, like he was agreeing while reserving the right to disagree later in private where it counted. He had disagreed later in private where it counted. He had disagreed later. Apparently, I watched my sister open the box. I watched my mother dab at her eyes. I watched my father look at me and look away and reach for the wine. "That's nice, Mum," I said. "You're not upset, are you?" my mother said. "Why would I be upset? It's just I know how you can get. I'm not upset. Because the ring should go to a grandchild and, well, sweetheart, at your age." She let the sentence hang the way she always let those sentences hang. Aunt Myrail made a sympathetic sound in her throat. Holden, across the table, gave me a look I had been seeing my whole life, the look of a man who has decided, with the full backing of his family, that I am the one who got the short end of every stick because I deserved to. "I'm not upset, Mum," I said again. And I meant it. I was not upset. I was something past upset. I was somewhere quiet and very clean, like a parking lot at 4 in the morning, and I was watching all of them from a great distance. Bristol slid the ring onto her right hand. It was too big. She would have it sized. "To family," my father said, raising his glass. "To family," everyone said. I raised my glass and drank. That was when my brother's phone rang. Holden has always been the kind of person who answers his phone at the dinner table because he wants you to know he is important enough to be called at the dinner table. He pulled it out of his blazer pocket without apology and looked at the screen, and his face did something I had not seen it do in 20 years. The colour went out of it in 2 stages, first from his forehead and then from his jaw, and he held up one finger to the table and stood up and walked into the den. "Holden, honey," my mother called after him. He didn't answer. The table waited. My father refilled his wine glass. Bristol's husband told a story about a patient he'd lost track of mid-sentence. The seersucker boys asked for ice cream and were told no. I watched the doorway to the den, and after about 90 seconds I could hear my brother's voice, low and tight, saying, "Yes, sir, no, sir. I had no idea. Of course, sir." He came back to the table the way you come back from a phone call when somebody has died. He sat down. He looked at his plate. He looked at my father. He looked at me, and then he looked at his plate again. "Holden," my mother said. "What was that?" "That was Roger Pell," Holden said. Roger Pell was the chief executive of the cybersecurity firm where my brother worked. He had been my brother's boss for 11 years. My brother had gone to Roger Pell's daughter's wedding. My brother had named his second son Hartley because Hartley was Roger Pell's wife's maiden name. Roger Pell did not call my brother on holidays. On Easter, my father said. What did he want? Holden looked at me one more time. The look on his face was a kind of looking I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the look of a person realizing he has been wrong about something so fundamental that he is going to have to rebuild his entire understanding of how the world works, starting from the foundation. He said, Holden said slowly, that the Wall Street Journal is running a profile on Friday. He said the embargo desk at the Journal sent his comms team an advance copy this afternoon because our firm has a vendor relationship with the subject of the profile. He wanted to know. He stopped. Holden, my mother said. Wanted to know what? He wanted to know, my brother said, if Adeline is my sister. The table went quiet in the particular way a table goes quiet when something nobody has prepared for has just walked into the room. My father set down his wineglass. My mother put her hand on her pearls. Aunt Myrell leaned forward. What does that mean? My father said. Dad, Holden, what does that mean? My brother looked at me. I looked back at him. I did not say anything. He said, Holden said, that the profile is about Adeline. He said the profile is about Adeline because the company that they're profiling, the one in the regulatory technology space, is hers. He said it's going to be on the front of the business section. He said the article values the company at $3.1 billion, and he said Adeline owns about a third of it. Aunt Myrell's vodka soda paused halfway to her mouth. That's not, my mother said. That can't be, Adeline. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate. I aligned it carefully with the edge of the linen. I looked up. It's true, I said. The silence after I said it had a kind of texture to it, like dust falling through a sunbeam. Nobody moved. The seersucker boys, sensing something, had stopped asking for ice cream and were staring at me with the open mouths of children watching adults do something they have never seen adults do before. Adeline, my father said. Yes, Dad. This is not. It's true, I said again. I started the company in 2019. We took our first institutional round in 2020. We've raised 4 times since then. The journal piece on Friday will mention some recent funding activity, but I'd rather you read it than try to summarize it for you. You're telling me, my mother said, that you... Yes. For how long? 7 years. Adeline? 7 years, Abin? 7 years, Mum. I did not raise my voice. I have learned over the course of my life that you don't have to raise your voice when you are saying something that nobody in the room can stand on. The fact carries itself. My father was looking at me like he had never seen me before, which, in a way, was correct. Why, he said, would you not tell us? I turned my wine glass on the linen. I watched the candlelight move across the surface of the wine. Dad, I said, when I started the company, I called you. Do you remember? He did not answer. I was 22. I had just graduated. I told you what I was building. I told you I had 3 customers. I told you I needed a small loan. I asked for $8,000, Dad. 8. And you told me to come to my senses. And then you hung up. Do you remember? Adeline. That was, you hung up? He looked at the ham. He did not say anything. And Mum, I said. I turned to my mother. 2 months after that call, I came home for the 4th of July. I tried to show you the first version of the product on my laptop. I sat down next to you at the kitchen island and I said, Mom, can I show you what I'm doing? And you said, honey, can it wait? I'm watching Holden's video of the kids at the lake. Do you remember that? I don't remember that, my mother said. I do. That's not the same as "and Holden." I turned. My brother would not meet my eyes. When I told you at Bristol's bridal shower in 2020 that I had raised $4 million, you laughed. You said raised from who? Your roommate. And then you went outside to smoke a cigar with Dad. Do you remember? Addie, do you remember? I remember. And Bristol. My sister was crying, quietly, the way she had learned to cry as a teenager when she wanted somebody to feel sorry for her. When I missed your bachelorette in Tulum because I had a board meeting, you sent me a text that said I always knew you'd find a way to make my wedding about you. Do you remember that? Addie, I was stressed. I remember it. I have the text. I kept it. I turned back to my father. I didn't tell you, I said, because I learned, somewhere around the 3rd year, that telling you would have made it about you. You would have wanted to invest. You would have wanted to introduce me to your guys. You would have called Holden and told him to be more supportive, and Holden would have started forwarding my emails to Roger Pell, and Mum would have started telling her bridge club. And the thing I was building, the actual thing, the company, the product, the people I was responsible for, would have become the prop in a play you were directing. And I have spent my entire life as a prop in plays the rest of you were directing. And I decided when I was 23 years old in a 1-bedroom apartment in Lawrenceville with a roommate I couldn't afford and a stain on the love seat and a folding table for a kitchen that I was done being a prop. And the only way to be done being a prop was to build something that was mine, that was entirely mine, that you could not take any credit for, because you had not contributed a single dollar or a single phone call or a single moment of belief. Aunt Myrel's drink had gone all the way down to the coaster. The seersucker boys were silent. I'm not angry, I said. That's the part that I want you to understand. I have not been angry in a long time. I stopped being angry probably around the Series B. Anger takes a lot of energy, and I needed the energy for other things. I am not here to punish you. I am not here to make a scene. I am here because tomorrow morning a story is going to run in a newspaper that some of you read, and I did not want you to find out from a stranger. My mother was crying now too, quietly, into her napkin. Adeline, my father said, we are so proud of you. I looked at him. I looked at him for a long time. I know you would say that, I said. I knew you would say that the moment you knew. That's part of why I waited. That's not fair. Dad, I'm not arguing with you. I'm telling you what I observed. He sat back in his chair. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at her napkin. I stood up. I took my purse from the back of the chair. I took my phone from my lap, where it was still buzzing. Quieter now, but still buzzing, because the world I had built was still humming along outside the dining room, indifferent to whether or not my family had finally caught up to it. I'm going to go, I said. Adeline, sit down. Dad, I love you. I have always loved you. I am going to keep loving you. But I am going to go now, because I have a flight in the morning and because I have said what I came to say, which was not in fact what I planned to say, but here we are. I walked around the table. I stopped behind my sister and put my hand on her shoulder for a moment. She did not look up. I think she could not. I walked past my brother, who could not look up either. I walked past my mother, who reached for my hand and then thought better of it. I walked to the front door. My father followed me out onto the porch. The boxwoods were still. The brass eagle on the flagpole caught the last of the daylight. He had his hands in his pockets and he looked, for the first time I could remember, smaller than the house. Adeline, he said. Dad, I know. Will we see you again? I thought about that. I thought about it for a long time. The cardiologist was probably putting his coat on inside. Bristol was probably trying to decide whether to take off the ring. Holden was probably already on the phone with Roger Pell again, walking the cat back, doing damage control on a story he had not been told until the rest of the world already knew. I'll think about it, Dad, I said. I got in the Subaru. I started it. The engine coughed the way it always coughed and then settled into the rumble I had been listening to for 16 years. I backed out of the driveway slowly. My father did not wave. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets watching me leave, and for the first time in my life he was the one who had to watch me go instead of the other way around. I drove south on I-95. The traffic was light because it was Easter. The sun was going down over the New Haven exit. I had a meeting in San Francisco on Tuesday, and a board call Wednesday, and a flight to London on Saturday, and on Friday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern, the Wall Street Journal was going to run a profile that would, in the language of the press release my comms team had drafted, formally introduce me to the world. But the world had already known. Quietly. For 7 years. That was the part nobody understood. The reveal wasn't the reveal. The reveal was just the moment my family caught up to a story that had been written in full without them. If you've ever sat at a table where the people who were supposed to love you talked about you like you were a problem to be solved, I want you to know something. You don't owe them the version of yourself they need. You owe yourself the version of you that's actually true. You can forgive without forgetting. You can love them without giving them the keys. And sometimes the loudest thing you will ever say to the people who underestimated you is the sound of your own car pulling out of their driveway for the last time on your terms. I am still figuring out what I want my relationship with my family to look like. I have not decided. I think I will see my father again. I think I will probably never tell my mother she was wrong about the ring. I think Bristol and I will eventually get a coffee, and it will be small and careful, and it will be the beginning of something neither of us can name yet. I think Holden and I are over, and I think that has been true since we were children, and I think it is okay. The Subaru is in my garage in Brooklyn now. I have not driven it in 3 months. I keep it because I keep it, because there was a girl once in a 1-bedroom in Lawrenceville with a stain on her love seat who needed that car to get to a meeting in Boston, and I do not ever want to forget her. I have spent a lot of time, in the months since that Easter, thinking about why it took me 7 years to walk out of that dining room. The answer I keep coming back to is that I needed those 7 years. Not to build the company. The company was built by year 4. I needed the 7 years to build myself. Because the girl who left Pittsburgh in a Subaru with the stain on her love seat was still partially the 11-year-old whose blue ribbon got shoved in a drawer, and she would have walked into that house and either burned it down or apologized for showing up. Neither of those would have been the ending I wanted. What I learned, slowly and at considerable cost, is that the people who underestimate you are giving you something whether they mean to or not. They are giving you the gift of not being watched. They are giving you the quiet. And quiet, if you can sit inside it without becoming bitter, is the most expensive thing in the world. My father did not know he was funding my education when he told me to come to my senses. My brother did not know he was sharpening my focus every time he laughed at the Subaru. My mother did not know she was teaching me, with every ring she gave to someone else, that the only inheritance that matters is the one you build with your own hands. They were not trying to help me. But I decided to let what they did help me anyway. And that decision, that small, daily, often furious decision, is the only thing I am genuinely proud of. There is a kind of strength people talk about that looks like shouting. I have not found that one to be very useful. The strength that actually works is the strength of staying in the room 1 extra minute when every part of you wants to leave. The strength of finishing the work when no one has clapped for any of it. The strength of refusing to become the small version of yourself that your family has reserved a seat for. That kind of strength does not look like much from the outside. From the outside, it looks like a woman in a Target sweater eating ham at a table that does not love her. From the inside, it is a forge. If you were sitting at a table like that right now, I want you to hear this from someone who has sat at one for a long time. You do not have to be loud. You do not have to be cruel. You do not have to be cruel. You do not have to win the dinner. You only have to refuse, gently and without explanation, to be smaller than you are. The people at that table will keep writing their version of you. Let them. Go write yours somewhere else, in a 1-bedroom apartment if you have to, on a folding table if you have to, by candlelight if it comes to that. And one day, if you have done the work, the boring, unglamorous, nobody clapping kind of work, the world will catch up to the truth you have been quietly living, and you will not have to say a single word. The truth itself will pull out a chair at the table and sit down.